Martin Kowalski finally broke down and took his 7-year-old daughter to the laundromat at 9:30 on a Tuesday. He told himself it was because the machines in their building were broken again. That was true. But the fuller truth, the one he hadn't said out loud to anyone, was that he'd put off laundry for 11 days because he'd been rationing quarters. Martin was 41 years old. He worked loading trucks at a distribution center on the east side of Columbus, pulling 4:30 a.m. shifts so he could be home by 2 when Becca got off the school bus. He'd been doing this for 3 years, ever since his wife Cheryl walked out and left behind a note on the kitchen counter and a daughter who still sometimes set 2 plates at dinner without thinking. He wasn't bitter about Cheryl anymore. Mostly he was just tired. The laundromat on Fenwick Street was called Sudsy's, which was the kind of cheerful name that had no business being attached to a place this fluorescent and sad. 3 of the overhead lights flickered. The floor had a sticky quality that Martin tried not to think about, but the machines worked, it was warm, and at this hour on a weeknight, it was nearly empty. Martin carried the laundry bag over one shoulder and held Becca's hand with his other. She was in her pajamas, dinosaur print, slightly too small now, which was something else on the list. And she had her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hops, tucked under her arm. She'd been half asleep when he'd bundled her into the car. Now she was awake in that glassy, soft way kids get laid at night, where everything is a little dreamy and they don't complain about things they'd normally complain about. "We're doing laundry," she'd said in the car, not upset, just verifying the facts of the universe. "We're doing laundry," Martin had confirmed. "Okay," she said, and that was that. He got 2 machines going, fed in his quarters with the careful attention of a man who has counted them twice already, and settled into one of the plastic chairs along the wall. Becca climbed into the chair beside him and leaned against his arm. The machines hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed with its bass turned up too loud, and then it was quiet again. That's when the door opened. A woman came in pulling a rolling laundry cart, the kind with a canvas bag on a wire frame, the kind that elderly people use. She looked to be in her early 30s, though something about the set of her shoulders made her seem older. She had dark hair pulled back quickly, a few strands loose around her face, and she was wearing a thin fleece jacket that wasn't right for the weather. October in Columbus had turned cold fast this year. Martin had felt it that morning when he'd gone out to his truck. Behind her, holding onto the metal frame of the cart with both hands, was a small boy. 5 years old, maybe 6. He had on a puffy winter coat, good coat, Martin noticed, clearly well cared for, and a pair of sneakers that lit up when he walked. The boy looked around the laundromat with the easy curiosity of children who haven't yet learned to be self-conscious about where they are or why. The woman nodded at Martin once, that brief, neutral acknowledgement of strangers sharing a space, and wheeled her cart toward the far end of the machines. She started sorting laundry with efficient, practiced movements. Martin looked away. It wasn't his business. Becca had spotted the boy. She watched him the way kids watch other kids, openly, without embarrassment, processing the question of whether this was a potential friend or just a feature of the background. The boy was looking at the row of machines, watching the clothes tumble in one of the porthole windows. His breath made a small fog circle on the glass. Martin pulled out his phone and checked the time. 22 minutes on the wash cycle. He had a granola bar in his jacket pocket that he'd been saving. It was supposed to be his breakfast for tomorrow, and he thought about eating it now and then thought better of it. Becca had shifted in her seat. She was watching the boy again. "Dad," she said quietly. That boy doesn't have his coat on anymore." Martin looked up. The woman had set the boy's puffy coat on top of the cart while she sorted. The boy was now in just a long-sleeved shirt, and he'd drifted a few machines down from his mother, still watching the tumbling clothes with great concentration. "He's inside," Martin said. "He's warm." "Oh," Becca said. She thought about this. "Okay." But a few minutes later she said, "Dad, the boy is hungry." Martin looked up again. He almost said, "How do you know that?" But then he saw it. The boy had moved down another few machines and was now standing very still, staring at the vending machine in the corner. Not the way kids look at vending machine when they're going to ask their parent for something. Not that hungry, eager, about to negotiate look. He was just standing there. Staring. His arms at his sides. Like he'd stopped expecting to get anything out of it and was just looking at the pictures. Martin knew that look. He knew it in his bones. 3 years ago, when Cheryl first left and he hadn't figured out yet how to manage everything on one income, there had been 2 weeks, he never talked about those 2 weeks, when he'd had to choose between keeping the lights on and buying enough food. He kept the lights on. He'd eaten peanut butter out of the jar and told Becca the fridge was broken and they were having a camping week. She'd been 4 then and had mostly believed him. But there had been one afternoon at the grocery store when he caught her standing in front of the bakery case just like that, arms at her sides, not asking, just looking. He'd cried in the car after. He hadn't cried much since Cheryl left, but he cried then. The vending machine had chips, crackers, a few candy bars, some trail mix. The prices were the highway robbery rates of all vending machines: $1.75 for a small bag of pretzels, $2.25 for peanut butter crackers. Martin looked at his jacket pocket. He had 3 singles and some change left after the laundry. He was going to need gas tomorrow. He looked at the boy. The boy hadn't moved. Martin stood up. Becca watched him go to the vending machine. He fed in $2 and got the peanut butter crackers because they had protein, and then he crouched down slightly so he was more at the boy's level. "Hey buddy," he said quietly, "what's your name?" The boy looked at him with the careful assessment children apply to unknown adults. "Theo," he said. And then, because he'd been raised right, "What's yours?" "Martin." "You like peanut butter crackers?" Theo looked at the crackers, then back at Martin. "Yes," he said simply. "Good, because I accidentally got the wrong thing. I wanted the chips but I pressed the wrong button." This was a lie, and not a very good one, but Martin delivered it with the casual confidence of a father who has told many small lies in service of a child's dignity. "You be doing me a favor." Theo looked at him for another moment. "Okay," he said, and accepted the crackers. That's when Martin heard a sharp intake of breath behind him. He turned. The woman, Theo's mother, was standing a few feet away. She'd seen the whole thing. Her jaw was tight, the kind of tight that meant she was working very hard to control her expression, and her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with happiness. "Theo," she said, her voice was steady, "give those back, please." Theo looked confused. "He gave them to me, Mama. He pressed the wrong." "I know what he said." She looked at Martin. Her eyes were careful and a little hard. "That's kind of you, but we're fine." Martin straightened up. He recognized this too. He'd been on the other side of it enough times, the burning need to refuse, to not be someone people pitied, to be fine when you weren't fine. Pride wasn't stubbornness. It was armor. Sometimes it was the only armor you had left. "My name's Martin," he said. "I'm here with my daughter Becca." He gestured toward where Becca was sitting, watching them with open curiosity, Mr. Hops pressed against her chest. "I really did mean it about the wrong button." He paused. "Sort of." The woman looked at him. Something shifted very slightly in her expression. "I'm Vivian," she said, not warmly but not coldly either, just honestly. "Nice to meet you, Vivian." Martin nodded toward the row of chairs. "The machines take about 20 minutes. You don't have to talk to me or anything, but the seats are more comfortable than standing." Vivian looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Theo, who was still holding the crackers with the patience of a child waiting to find out what the rules were going to be. Then she looked at Becca, who gave a small, instinctive wave. "Fine," Vivian said, not gratefully, "just fine." She and Theo came and sat down, leaving one empty chair between her and Martin, which felt like the right distance. Theo sat next to his mother and opened the crackers with great seriousness. Becca watched him for a moment and then said, in the straightforward way of 7-year-olds, "I like your shoes, they light up." Theo looked down at his shoes. He stomped one foot on the floor to make the lights flash. "I know," he said. "They're good." "Yeah," Becca agreed. And that, somehow, was enough for them. Within 5 minutes they were sharing the row of chairs like they'd been assigned seats next to each other, Becca showing Theo something on her rabbit's ear that was apparently interesting, Theo nodding with the gravity of a child taking information seriously. Vivian watched them. Martin watched the machines. After a while, Vivian said, "You work early shifts." Martin looked at her. "How'd you know?" "You look like you've been up since before dawn and you're still going." She said it neutrally, not as an insult. "I used to work early shifts, before." Before was a word that carried a lot. Martin didn't ask what it meant for her, he just nodded. "Distribution center," he said, 4:30 start." "I'm looking," Vivian said, "for work." There was a controlled quality to how she said it, the way you say something you've said many times and have learned to say without letting it cost you too much each time. "Theo's been sick, nothing serious, but he missed a lot of school in September and I missed a lot of shifts and my last job, it didn't work out." Martin nodded slowly. "What kind of work?" "Administrative, office stuff. I'm good with computers, scheduling, data entry, that kind of thing. She paused. I have a degree. That probably sounds strange to say in a laundromat at 9:30 at night, but... She shrugged. I have a degree. It doesn't sound strange, Martin said. It sounds like you want me to know you're not. He stopped, trying to find the right word. Stuck, Vivian said. I want you to know I'm not stuck. This is a setback, not a situation. Martin looked at her. My wife left 3 years ago, he said. First 6 months, I told myself the same thing every single day. Sometimes you have to say it even when you're not sure you believe it. Vivian was quiet for a moment. The machines hummed. Theo said something to Becca that made her giggle. We've been staying at my cousin's, Vivian said finally. She's got a 2-bedroom and she's been good about it. But it's been 3 months now, and I can feel that it's... She stopped. Getting to be a lot, Martin said. Getting to be a lot, she agreed. Martin looked at Theo, who was now trying to balance a cracker on his nose while Becca watched with scientific interest. He was a good kid. That was clear from the way he moved, the way he'd said what's yours back to Martin. Someone had put care into that boy. What kind of scheduling software? Martin said. Vivian looked at him. What? You said scheduling. What software do you use? SAP mostly, some Oracle. I can learn anything in about a week, honestly. It's all the same logic once you... She caught herself. Why? Martin reached into his jacket pocket. He had an old receipt from the gas station and a stubby pencil. He always had a stubby pencil, a habit from his own father who'd been a carpenter. He wrote down a name and a phone number. Guy named Terrence Webb, he said. He manages the front office at the distribution center. His assistant quit 2 months ago and they've been using a temp, and I happen to know Terrence thinks the temp is. He tilted his head. Not great. They use SAP for scheduling the dispatch routes. Vivian stared at the receipt. She didn't take it immediately. I don't know if he's hiring, Martin said. I'm a warehouse guy. I don't know what goes on in the front office. But Terrence is a decent man. If you call and mention my name and tell him what you told me, he'll at least have a real conversation with you. He set the receipt on the chair between them. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm just passing along information. People pass along information all the time. Vivian looked at the receipt, then at Martin. Her jaw worked for a second. You don't know me, she said. No, Martin said, but your kid shared his cracker wrapper with my daughter to make a paper airplane, and she's about to tell him that's not how paper airplanes work, so. He nodded toward the kids. Vivian looked. Becca was in fact gently correcting Theo's aeronautical assumptions, demonstrating a fold with the seriousness of someone who had opinions about this. Theo was listening. Vivian let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Almost. She picked up the receipt. She held it for a while without saying anything. Outside it had started to rain. Martin could hear it on the laundromat's flat roof, a soft, steady drumming. The machines beeped their end-of-cycle alerts one after another, and the two of them got up to move their laundry to the dryers, working in parallel at opposite ends of the row. While Martin was loading the dryer, Becca appeared at his elbow. Dad, she said quietly. Yeah, bug. Theo said they sleep at his Auntie Patrice's and there's not a lot of room and he has to sleep on an air mattress in the living room. She said this with the careful gravity of a child reporting something that has upset her and she's trying to understand if it should. Is that okay? Martin glanced over at Vivian, who was folding a small shirt, Theo's, with the automatic, careful movements of someone who has folded it 100 times. She hadn't heard. Some people go through hard patches, Martin said quietly, crouching down to Becca's level. Remember when our microwave broke and we had to use the neighbors for 2 weeks? Yeah. That's a hard patch. Theo and his mom are in a hard patch right now, but his mom is working on fixing it. Becca thought about this with the solemn focus she applied to everything. Should I not say anything about it? I think just be normal. Just be his friend. Becca nodded once, very seriously, and went back to Theo. Martin finished loading the dryer. He stood up and looked at the ceiling for a second. He was thinking about his bills, which he'd been not thinking about for 3 days because every time he thought about them the numbers didn't come out right. He was thinking about the gas he needed in the granola bar he'd given up and Becca's pajamas that were getting too small. He was thinking about Terrence, and whether Terrence had filled the position yet, and whether he'd stepped over some line by giving a stranger his supervisor's phone number. He decided he didn't care if he had. The dryers ran for 45 minutes. By the end of it, Theo had fallen asleep with his head against his mother's arm, his light-up sneakers dangling off the edge of the chair. Becca was asleep too, or close to it, listing slowly toward Martin's shoulder. The laundromat had gotten even quieter, just the tumbling of the dryers and the rain on the roof and the occasional passing car. Vivian folded in silence. Martin folded in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. He doesn't sleep enough, Vivian said softly, looking at Theo. He's been having bad dreams since we moved out of our apartment. He doesn't say what they're about. She smoothed the hair off his forehead, a gesture so practiced and automatic she probably didn't know she was doing it. He told me last week that his dreams are about being in a place and not knowing how to get home. Martin looked at Theo's sleeping face. At the sneakers with their lights gone dark now, just regular shoes when they weren't moving. Becca used to wake up crying for her mom, Martin said, first year, almost every night. I didn't know what to say. I'd just sit on the floor by her bed and talk about whatever. What she did in school. What we were going to have for breakfast. Just talk until she fell back asleep. Vivian nodded slowly. You just have to be there, she said. That's all they really need, I think, just to know you're there. Yeah, Martin said. I think so. She folded the last of the laundry. Martin loaded his bag. They woke the kids gently, and there was that soft, warm chaos of half-asleep children being guided into coats and told where to put their feet. At the door, Vivian paused with her cart. The rain was still coming down, steady and cold. Her car was at the far end of the parking lot, and she hadn't thought to bring an umbrella, and Martin could see her mentally calculating the logistics of getting Theo and the cart across the wet asphalt. I can bring my car around, Martin said. Drop you at yours. Vivian looked at him. I'm not, Martin started. I know you're fine. I'm not saying you're not. I'm just saying it's raining and your kid is asleep and my car is right there. Vivian looked at the rain. At Theo, who had wrapped his arms around her waist and was pressing his face against her jacket with his eyes closed. At Martine. Okay, she said. Yeah, okay. He pulled the car around. She lifted Theo in and buckled him beside Becca in the back seat, and the two children slept against each other without knowing it, strangers in the easy way that only children can be. Martin drove the 15 feet across the parking lot and Vivian laughed, actually laughed, quietly, at how short the distance was. Thank you, she said, and it came out different from how she'd said things all evening, less careful, more real. You've got Terrence's number, Martin said. I've got Terrence's number, she said. She got Theo out, settled him against her shoulder, and wrestled the cart out of the back seat while Martin held the door. She'd parked under a light that had gone half out, giving her car a dim, flickering quality. It was an old Civic, well-kept, the kind of car that was still running because someone had taken care of it. She buckled Theo in and closed the door softly so he wouldn't wake. Then she stood by the driver's side for a second in the rain, one hand on the roof, and looked back at Martin. I used to be the person who helped, she said. It wasn't self-pity. It was just a fact she seemed to be handing him, so he'd understand. I organized the coat drives at Theo's school. I made casseroles for people. I thought if I just kept doing everything right, I'd be okay. Martin stood in the rain with her. He didn't offer her a refrain or a piece of wisdom. He just listened. I'm going to call Terrence, she said. I know, Martin said. If he's not hiring. Then he's not hiring and you try somewhere else, but call. Vivian nodded. She got in her car. Martin waited until she'd started it. The engine turned over on the second try and then went back to his own car where Becca was still sleeping, her cheek against the window. Mr. Hops clutched to her chest. He sat in the parking lot for a moment before starting the car. The rain moved across the windshield in shifting patterns. 3 weeks later, Martin was in the break room at the distribution center microwaving something unremarkable when Terrence came in and poured himself a coffee and said, without much preamble, your friend started Monday. Martin looked up. She work out okay. Better than okay. She had the routing schedule rebuilt by Wednesday. I don't know what the temp was doing for 2 months. Terrence shook his head. Sharp woman, the kind that's been through some stuff. Martin nodded and looked back at his food. She said to tell you thank you, Terrence said. She doesn't need to thank me, Martin said. I just mentioned your name. Terrence gave him a look. You know that's not nothing. Martin thought about a Tuesday night at a laundromat. A boy standing in front of a vending machine with his arms at his sides. A woman who folded a small shirt with the automatic care of someone who has done it 100 times and would do it 100 more. He thought about Becca showing a stranger's child how to fold a proper paper airplane, perfectly ordinary and perfectly generous, the way children are when no one has taught them yet to hold back. "No," he said, "I know it's not nothing." He carried his lunch back to the warehouse and went back to work. But that night, when he got home and Becca ran at him from the couch where she'd been doing homework, he held on a second longer than usual. She didn't ask why. She just held back and then wriggled free to tell him about her day. Some things don't need to be explained. Some things are just how people move through the world, quietly noticing, deciding to act, and then going on. Not because it always works out. Not because the world is fair or the math is easy or the quarters are always enough, but because sometimes a small thing done in the right moment opens a door that someone has been standing outside of for a very long time. Martin didn't think of himself as a generous man. He thought of himself as a tired man who was doing his best. But maybe, he had learned, those two things could be the same thing. And maybe that was enough. I keep thinking about that vending machine. Not the crackers, not the $2, just the image of a little boy standing in front of it with his arms at his sides, not asking for anything. That's the part that stays with me. There's something about a child who has already learned not to ask. That's not innocence lost slowly, that's innocence taken fast, by circumstances the child had no hand in creating. Theo didn't choose any of what had happened to his family. He just absorbed it, the way kids do, and somewhere along the way he stopped expecting things to come to him. He just looked. Martin saw that, and here's what I think matters most about that moment: he didn't look away. He could have. Most people do, not because they're cruel but because looking means deciding, and deciding takes something out of you when you're already running low. Martin was running low. He'd counted his quarters, he'd skipped his own breakfast. And he still turned and walked to that machine. That's what I'd call doing right when it costs you. Not when it's easy, not when you have plenty to spare, but when you're calculating your own gas money and you do it anyway. I think that's the truest form of character, not what we do when we're comfortable, but what we do when we're tired and it still matters to us that we do it. And then there's Vivian. She had a degree. She had skills. She had worked hard her whole life and organized coat drives and made casseroles for other people, and then life came apart anyway. What struck me about her isn't the hardship, it's the line she said in that parking lot: "I used to be the person who helped." She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was trying to explain herself, to hold on to who she knew herself to be even when everything external said otherwise. That takes a kind of inner strength that I think we don't talk about enough, the stubbornness to keep your sense of self intact when your circumstances are telling you a different story about who you are. And the intelligence it took to hear Martin's offer and actually take it, not the crackers at first, because pride is real and it's not always wrong, but the phone number. The practical thing. The door she could walk through on her own terms. That's wisdom, knowing the difference between charity and a genuine hand extended by someone who's been in the mud themselves. What I take from Martin and Vivian and their kids falling asleep against each other in the back seat is something simple. The cause and effect here wasn't dramatic. Nobody won the lottery. Nobody got rescued by someone powerful. A tired man noticed a hungry child, spent $2 he could barely spare, mentioned a name to his supervisor, and a woman who had been standing outside a closed door found it open just enough to walk through. Small causes, real effects. That's how most of the world actually works, I think, not in grand gestures but in quiet moments where someone decides to pay attention and then do the next right thing. Becca already knew this, the way children sometimes know things before they can articulate them. She just said, "Should I be his friend?" And when her dad said yes, she went and taught him how to fold a paper airplane. Maybe that's the whole lesson, right there.